friends, as you know, we've been running this series on the short story in Europe and particularly in England for the last 4 or 5 months. And today's discussion would be on Joseph Conrad's short story, The Lagoon. You must have heard of Joseph Conrad. He was a writer who had shifted to England, and before that he had gone to different countries, a variety of cultures he had seen, and he then learned English a little late in life, but he became one of the most major voices of English fiction. So that's a long story. We begin with the short introduction about this author who learned so much from the world around him, and he was always surrounded by what could be called difficult circumstances. To begin with, because he was born in Poland, his name, the original name is Joseph Theodore Conrad Korzenowski, a difficult name, of course, even to pronounce by us. He was the that was the original name of Joseph Conrad. He changed to Joseph Conrad because this was easy on the tongue. Conrad was born in 1857 in Ukraine, and he died in 1924 in Kent, England. Now think about the year. You can never forget this year, because all of us, Indians, know that in the same year as he was born, we had a very important event of history, 1857, you can never forget it, and also that he was born in Ukraine, which has been in the news for the last few years. And he died in 1924 in Kent, England. So here itself, the journey of the man from Ukraine to England is suggested, and he died at the ripe age of the 70s. And in Kent, England, so which means that he spent the last few years of his life in England itself. But before that, he was moving around. He didn't belong to any particular country, any particular culture, any particular language. He was learning so much. He was going through lots of experiences, social and individual. He was face to face with threats. He was face to face with the police, the administration, all those things, and that gave him a chance to become intelligent and sensitive, in the different institutions that were at work in Europe at that point of time. So such things, are difficult for other people to bear, but so far as writers are concerned, they always find some kind of truth, some kind of aspect of reality around them. And if the reality, different aspects of reality, different facets of reality are contending with one another, clashing with one another, and the writer, feels the pressure of these all the time, then the creative writer learns quite a bit, and that enters his language, his expression, his attitude, his personality, and that is quite valuable so far as the writer is concerned. He was a novelist and short story writer of Polish descent. So one can never forget one's descent, one's origins, one's place of birth, the place of early living, the parents from where the child learns the language and the tidbits of early life. So Polish descent is important. Later on, this Polish person, the citizen of Poland, would be moving around and then finally settling down in England. So that is, as I already suggested, was a point of strength for Joseph Conrad. He wrote novels such as Lord Jim, Nostromo, and the short story Heart of Darkness. You must have all heard about Heart of Darkness, because this is prescribed for many courses in India, particularly at the higher level. And we generally consider Heart of Darkness a short novel, but then some people call it a short story also. Which this also suggests, that for writing, Conrad did not bother about distinctions of the novel and the short story. They were one and the same thing. So Jim is a long short story, Nostromo is a long short story. Both are novels, you can call them, but it doesn't make any difference to the writer, uh, Joseph Conrad. And you can call Heart of Darkness short novel, and he can call it a short story. So that is the domain, where writers, assert their own choice. Now, the years of importance, years of the writing of these works and others that he wrote, Secret Agent, for instance, these are important in terms of the time in which they were composed. 1900, just the beginning of the 20th century, threshold of the 20th century, and the ending of the 19th century. Of course, all of us know that these numbers don't mean anything. Time doesn't stop at 1900 and doesn't start again at 1901. That is only a distinction that human beings make in order to just have a reference to the particular segment of time which is important, but not the numbers that like 1900 and 1904. They only tell us about the circumstance that might have existed when he wrote these novels. So, what is the circumstance? You might wonder, you might ask me, you might ask yourself as you read about these things. So what are the circumstances then? Now, one circumstance that you have to keep in mind is that 19th century was a troubled century. It was a century of uncertainty. It was a century where Europe had established its centers of power in some countries in the world, and this could be called colonialism because they had captured countries as and kept them as colonies, and these colonies presented a picture of diversity. So if you are in India as a colonizer, you have one aspect of reality. If you are in let's say Africa, then you have another. If you are in other parts of the eastern world, then you will have a specific stamp of the circumstances there. And a person who has shifted from one place to another, therefore, would be always existing, capturing through for his existence the different aspects of reality. So, Lord Jim, Nostromo, and Heart of Darkness, they are not about England. They are about other countries. So, in a way, we get to know about the experiences of this man, because he was not adding to literature anything. He was basically sharing his experiences with what he saw, what he went through in different countries of the world. And you can really say that he was not a national citizen of a nation, but he was an international citizen, shifting from one place to another, and that is made clear quite well by the novels and the short stories that he wrote. Joseph Conrad called many of his short stories tales. Why tales? And what is the difference between a short story and a tale? You know that, and we have discussed it, in the first lecture. Our team, including me, discussed the short story form. So the question of tale arose there also. So what's the difference? Short story is of course short, but then it is generally in the written form. Written form means that you write something, you commit yourself to certain words. Then you get those words printed on a page, and they assume a kind of permanence just because they have been printed and they can't be altered. Therefore, short stories are captured through language. That is fixed language, and some people can use the word not fixed but frozen in the language, because there they freeze and there they become definite in their form. So what about the tales? Tales are not written, they are told. So there had been, before the printing press came into being, and even when it had, come into existence, it was only in the developed countries that we had the presses, and the press was definitely playing a role. But then, literature existed even before the invention of the, printing press. So, what was the circumstance in which stories were tales? The circumstance was that stories were not printed, and people would move around their countries, within the country, the different regions. They would learn the skill of telling stories, and they will move around, and there will be an audience, and they will tell tales to them. And tales also had a kind of reality which the printed word may not have, in that sense, because the tales always are affected by, are influenced by the audience. So the writer, the teller of the tale, he stands